There are a few things you have to do when boxing training which will literally help you improve, not just long term, but in your next session. I know this because when I started boxing over 6 years ago, I was not practicing these things and I missed out on so much progress, and I wasn't progressing as quickly as I would like to from not practicing these things. If you are new here, my name is Cody. I'm an amateur boxer and boxing coach, and today I'm going to be running you through a 7-step checklist of things to practice in your next boxing session, which is guaranteed to improve your boxing skill and help you dominate sparring more, last longer when you're hitting the bag, and just get better at boxing overall. And before we get started, I do have a completely free online boxing forum with a free shadow boxing guide inside, which will help you practice everything we're going to be going through today. I'll leave the link in the description for that, but otherwise, let's get started with the video. The first step of the checklist, which is going to be footwork and stance. This is something you have to get really good at. So from your boxing stance, you've got to be able to maintain that shape and footwork no matter where you move. So if you're new to boxing especially, you have to make sure that when you're moving, you're keeping that shape and you're keeping that stance. We're not bringing the feet together, we're not crossing the feet as we move left and right, and no matter where you are, you should be able to throw punches and also defend punches as well, because if your feet and stance is not in the right place, you won't be able to do that efficiently and you will struggle. So when you're shadow boxing, hitting the bag, sparring, hitting the pads, whatever you're doing, whatever type of practice, you should be making sure that your footwork and your stance is in the correct place at all times. Now, step 2 on the checklist is being able to move all directions whilst also changing the tempo of your footwork. So if you've got your stance right and you know what you need to do at a slower pace, that's great, but now we need to be able to pick the pace up and bring it back down whenever we want. So if you're shadow boxing, we're moving around, what we don't want to do is just stay in this one pace all the time and only move one direction. Maybe you move to your left a lot. First of all, you've got to be able to make sure you can move forwards, backwards, left and right whilst keeping your stance, and then be able to also take little angles and move around at different angles there. But you've got to be able to change that pace, which is a key thing. If you practice at a slower pace all the time, that's great, because when you're going slower, it's easier to think you're getting things right, but you need to be able to speed it up as well. So if we're here, I might slow it down, throw a few shots, and then I might go into bam, bam, move around, boom, 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 and then move again. Being able to change that pace whilst keeping my shape, because this makes you really unpredictable. If you're moving at the same tempo all the time, someone will pick up on that. Step 3 on the checklist is going to be being able to throw straight punches efficiently. So you've got your stance, you've got your footwork, you're mixing the footwork up now and advancing it, but also you need to be able to throw punches. I haven't even talked about throwing punches yet, because you box with your feet and not your hands. So when you've got the feet in the right place, the hands can now follow. And what you want to work on is your jab and your cross the most. This is what you want to work on the most, because they're the most important punches in boxing and they can set up other punches. And from other punches, they're quite easy to throw. Like a right hook, for example, is exactly the same as my cross in terms of body mechanics. My hip and my foot is doing the same thing, except my arm's coming at a different angle. It's the same sort of thing. It's like when you throw a jab, you twist your hip. Like when I throw a hook, I'll twist my hip. It's the same sort of mechanic. So if you learn straight shots first, all the other punches actually become a little bit easier to learn. So get really good at them straight shots, your jab and your cross. And then you can mix up these combos. You can go 1, 2 down the middle. You might go 1 to the head, 2 to the body. You might go 1, 2, 1. You might go 2, 1. You might go double jab, 2 to the body, 1 to the head. You can mix up all these different combos, but your straight shots are your best friends. You've got to be utilizing straight shots and becoming a master at them, and then the hooks and the uppercuts will follow along behind that. Now, step 4 on the checklist, we've got the feet moving, we're throwing punches, but now we want to include head movement. So when you're throwing them straight shots and in between, we want to be moving our head and keeping it off the center line now. So as you can see, when I'm shadow boxing, I instantly look more professional just because I'm moving that little bit more now. I'm not doing anything complicated. I'm just slipping and rolling. I'm just keeping my head movement busy. So notice how even a complete beginner, even if you haven't even learned your boxing stance, these are the steps you want to take. Boxing stance, footwork, changing the tempo of the feet, then add punches and head movement on. If you go through all of these steps, you will take your shadow boxing, bag work, pad work to a whole completely new level because we're building them foundations. So now, once you've got that head movement, add this into your shadow boxing. You're throwing punches, but we're not just standing in one spot. We're going boom, boom, then we're moving. Change the pace with the feet. Just like so. And this is how you get better at boxing, by practicing these steps. Now, step number 5 on the checklist is going to be a bit about your imagination. You're going to have to use your brain a little bit more for this one and less physical activity here. But what we think about is visualizing an opponent. Whenever you're boxing training, regardless of if you're sparring or just shadow boxing, you have to be thinking about an opponent. So if we take sparring away and you've got no one in front of you, you train on your own or you're hitting the bag or whatever, you have to be visualizing an opponent all the time. Now, why might we do that? Well, it makes the training more realistic, and you're actually going to start creating better habits when you're training. Because if you're comfort training, you know, looking in the mirror while shadow boxing, getting a bit comfortable, maybe dropping your hands, and just standing around like this, if you were to spar like that, you're going to get caught with punches. You're not going to spar like that. It's not realistic. So whenever you're shadow boxing or hitting the bag, what you want to think about is visualizing an opponent. Always think about there's someone there. And this is why we do head movement, even if we've got nothing coming. If we're shadow boxing, that's why we move our head, because we've got to imagine like an opponent is in front of us trying to hit us back. Because otherwise we're kind of just standing there throwing punches, and that's great, but you're not really boxing. Boxing is a sport of hitting and not getting hit. So you have to throw punches, but you also have to imagine like an opponent is throwing punches back at you. Step number 6 on the checklist actually strings very closely in with the last step. Now, what I'm talking about is creating urgency in your training. Now, I see a lot of people, this goes back to even like changing the tempo as well, like I spoke about earlier, but a lot of people just work at one pace and there's no urgency to do anything. Like if you're practicing punches and defense, that's great, but we also need to be urgent with what we're doing. So rather than going boom, boom, you know, why not get out of there? Create a bit of urgency, bit of speed on it. So then move, then move. See how there, the difference in tempo is completely different. You're making things more realistic, and you have to get comfortable with this tempo, because otherwise if you go in and spar and someone brings you that tempo but you're still going slow, you're going to have a flipping hard night. I promise you that. So being able to work at that high pace is key, especially in amateur boxing, where most of the time it's 3 rounds, usually 2 minutes long for most people. So you've got to be ready to keep that pace high. So it's only 3 rounds for 2 minutes. You're not boxing for long. So get comfortable with that high tempo. Make your training more of a sprint rather than a marathon, like when you're shadow boxing, hitting the bag. Don't get too comfy in one spot. Create a bit of urgency. Then move. Then move. Everything has to be sharp and intentful. Now, step number 7 on the checklist is actually going to be putting it all together. Now, I know that sounds pretty simple and you probably think, well, of course you've got to put it all together. But it doesn't mean you can just go into your next session guns blazing, thinking that it's that easy. You've got to try and build things up. So again, I would highly recommend going through each step, you know, starting with the feet, getting the stance right. Then, you know, upping the tempo here and there, changing the footwork, then adding your straight shots. Move the head. And then you can start adding the steps on from there and visualize an opponent and creating that urgency. Because if you try and throw it all in straight away, you might struggle. So take it round by round at a time, going through these steps, because that's how you get better. Not by just going all in at once. You got to build them foundations, and that's how you get better at boxing training. Because I absolutely promise you now, if you practice all of the things I've just gone through there, you will improve. 100% guarantee it, because you're not doing all of these things. Because if you were, your boxing training would be progressing way quicker than it is now. But if you want to progress it even further, then make sure you press the link in the description and join my free boxing forum, get my free shadow boxing guide. I'll leave that down below. Otherwise, I'll see you soon.